I'm just doing just looking around the room. I think panel's all here, staff are all here. Some of the submitters are here, if not all of them. I don't think Mr. Lawson's back yet, but I don't think that needs stop us from proceeding. Here's Mr. Lawson arriving now. Mr. Gauntlet's here. So I think what we'll do now is just go through and see if there's any other matters relating to the Raglan issue that are broader than the character ones. Maybe this time we'll start with you, Ms. Sedgwick.
I'm sorry. No, at the moment I'm all good. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Tiaho?
No, I think I'll wait until we hear more from the submitters on the beacon.
Okay. Mr. Cooney?
Yeah, just briefly, just on that policy that you've changed, Ms. Salmon, that's 4.514, and Ms. Sedgwick mentioned about the vagueness of those words. I think we need to look at that wording there, and you were going to have a look at it and get back to us at the end of this hearing. So I just bring that to your attention. I saw some words in one of the, I think it's rangatihi there, something to have regard to the function, change and vitality of the area, or something like that. I don't know. They might be just as vague, but yeah, there are some different words. But anyhow, we'll look at that at the end.
Okay, I will take a look at that and the rangatahi policy also.
Yeah.
Thanks. I've just got a couple, I think. This won't take very long. I do want to talk about the beacon, but I'll do that last, I think. Can I just clarify the issue around the corner buildings, and you've addressed that paragraphs 102 onwards in your 42A report, Ms. Salmon. And you talk about the obligation for there to be 2-storey buildings on the corners. Is that an obligation to say that buildings must be 2 stories or shall not exceed 2 stories?
Yeah, I did look at the wording of that policy, and I found it quite odd that it does, that it did seem to say that buildings have to be 2 stories.
Yeah, well, that's my reading of it, and that's why I guess I'm asking, is that the intention? Is that a drafting issue, or is that what was intended, or what you would recommend?
I did have a look at the other provisions, the notified provisions, to kind of give me some guidance around whether this was intentional or not, because I didn't get any guidance from the Section 32A report, Section 32 report. And I think I mentioned in that section of my report that there were a couple of provisions, namely the business, the urban design business guidelines, and then the town centre character statement. And I kind of came up with a happy medium, I guess, that they are intended to be 2 stories. But I did think back and forth about whether or not this was at least 2 stories or a maximum of 2 stories. But just based on those 2 other provisions, which is really my only other guidance, I landed at 2 stories. And I think that was a happy medium between, you can go higher, possibly under the guidelines within the business zone guidelines, whereas the character statement kind of refers to 1 to 2 story buildings, a characteristic of Raglan. So I guess that's kind of where I landed.
So your recommendation is that they need to be, so it's a minimum, there's a minimum and a maximum that are both the same, effectively.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have a comment on that, Mr. Coons? It just seems unusual. I mean, I've seen it often, you know, where things are limited to 1 story, or a maximum of 2, or a maximum of 3. But it would be, I think it would be pretty uncommon to say they shall be two-storey buildings, full stop.
I think it was also in recognition that corner buildings are, you know, they're different. They offer different things than other buildings within the town centre. They are, you know, more important.
Yeah, I know they bookend it and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But what's your view from a urban design / character point of view, Mr. Coon?
So I think that's right in that the corner buildings are being set as markers from an urban design point of view. So that's a good principle to have. I have seen this play out in the Taupō town centre, where there are limits on the number of stories of buildings, but no height limit. And then you end up with an argument about, well, you know, some commercial buildings will have a really, really tall stud for the first floor and then smaller on top. So, you know, what is the effect of that? So I would have thought a number of stories with a height limit would be a more appropriate way to look at it.
Do you mean no more than 2 stories, or that they shall be 2-storey and no higher than 7.5 metres?
Or 8 metres or whatever.
Or 8, whatever.
Works for a commercial building, yeah.
So you would say that, just to be clear, I'm not arguing, I'm just trying to be clear what you're telling me. Are you saying that it would not be appropriate to have to make provision for 1-storey buildings on the corners? Is that the point you're making?
It's also
or 1-storey, conventional 1-storey buildings of 4 metres high or whatever they are?
It's only in relation to new built form also, the policy, so it only relates to new built form.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I just want to be clear, I'm not arguing, I'm just trying to understand what Mr. Coombs is actually suggesting. So there's a height limit of 7.5 metres or 8 metres. Yeah. And what about if someone came along and said, I've got a 4.5 metre building, single story, would that be contemplated or not contemplated in your mind?
I wasn't involved in this part of the plan, sir. I was here mainly for the character stuff, but I
think it is a character issue. That's the reason that people are wanting 2 stories or suggesting 2 stories on the corner.
I think for new builds, that's an appropriate response.
To make them 2-storey.
Yes.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just wanted to be clear. Ms. Salmon, this is just a question of detail and clarity. I don't know if you've got a copy, and we don't need it on the screen, but on page 42 of your section 42A report, you're talking, there's a discussion there around what I would call a mixed housing development at 4 Stewart Street, and you've provided some sort of renderings of that and a map and so forth.
Yes.
And you see in figure 2, look, I might be wrong, but you've got that pink area shown as being 4 Stewart Street. Isn't it actually the property next door to that, on the corner?
Yes, you're correct.
Because I was looking at it and I looked at it and turned it round and upside down and I couldn't make it work. And then I thought, oh, maybe it's next door.
No, you're correct. It is the.
Oh, that's a relief. I thought I'd lost all sense of proportion. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Right. Yeah.
At paragraph 153, when you're talking about coastal walkways, and there's been a submission by I'm not sure how you pronounce their name, the Chiral Family Trust, about the coastal walkway that is shown along the waterfront. And you've said that's sort of consistent with the NZCPS about giving public access to the coast and so forth. My understanding of the plan provisions is that walkway that's shown there has no other provisions in the plan associated with it other than being a dotted line on the planning map. Is that right?
Yes, I think that is correct. It is just shown as a dotted line.
And I mean, given that that's private land, it's not like it's an esplanade reserve or whatever else.
No, and sorry, the subject.
I know the intention would be if someone subdivided that the council would then take it.
Yeah.
But is it I mean, I just wonder whether it's going too far in the district plan to actually show a walkway for which there's no provision made other than saying there's an Esplanade reserve taking provision on subdivision, unless I might be missing something altogether, but especially as it's private land and people looking at the district plan, you know, say, oh, I can walk along here, there's a coastal walkway shown, you know, and all of a sudden then people have got, you know, folk in their front lawn that they didn't anticipate.
That particular provision kicks in terms of subdivision. So there
Yes.
are, as I understand it, the subdivision rules that you've alluded to. And so if you do have, if you are going to subdivide that site and you've got that yellow dashed line, then there is a rule around that. But it
just seems strange to me to have a coastal walkway shown. But I don't think it even says that it's indicative or future on subdivision. The annotation implies that there's a coastal walkway along private land along the foreshore. There may be provisions hidden away somewhere that I haven't found, but it seems to me entirely appropriate to do what Ms. Ratt says. But that does seem to be different though than showing, you know, it's like showing an indicative road on private land that's not subject to the plan change or something. People say, well, you know, you've put this road on my property and it's mine and I don't want it there.
I think it is important that they are shown, just because these are the high priority walkways that council have identified. You know, these are walkways that we'd really love to have, and I think if they were subdivided, then we want to make it clear to the applicants that we are hoping to secure that as a walkway.
Oh, no, I get that. But a lot of the people probably don't have any intention of subdividing ever, because the legend says walkway, cycleway, bridleway, brackets under review, which I put to you as misleading. It's not under review. It's a proposal that says on subdivision, an Esplanade reserve will be taken, or an Esplanade strip will be taken.
Right.
And the intention of that is if they all join up, there'll be a coastal walkway along there. But you're not going to create a coastal walkway on the basis of one lot being subdivided.
No, but if we didn't secure it, then we'd miss out altogether.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that having the subdivision rule is one thing, but having a map that says it's a walkway, cycleway, bridleway under review in a plan that only relates to the taking of Esplanade strips seems to be a, it's not just, I mean, it's basically telling people on private land that the council's anticipating having a walkway along their private property, and it's only triggered if they subdivide.
Can
I had a look at this issue, and I'm inclined to agree with the chair on it, but I sort of backed away from it to raise it, because I think it's prevalent throughout the plan, isn't it? Aren't walkways and cycleways throughout the plan? And so the chair raises a good point, because there's a lot of precedent case law that you can't, in a plan, you shouldn't identify reserves on someone's private land, which you may or may not acquire in the future, because it puts a blight on that land. And so I think that's what the chair is raising, but it does have wider implications.
So is the problem then that it states that it doesn't state, I guess, that it's indicative? Does it need more clarification that it's indicative and it's only, I guess the rules only come into play if you subdivide your property? Is that what?
But most people, a lot of people, when they're looking at, you know, at buying a bit of property, will just look at the planning map and they'll say, oh, there's a walkway, cycleway, bridleway under review on the front of this section. All I'm looking to do is to buy that property and, you know, and use it as my batch or move to there because I'd love to live there. And they'd look at it, and the first thing that they would do is ring the council up and say, what's the story with this walkway along the front of my place?
Yeah.
I own it.
Yeah.
Because it's only a question of, it's not, I don't want to make a big deal of it either, but it's not under review.
No, I take your point. I don't actually know, does it say under review on the planning map?
Yep. Well, that's what I haven't got it in front of me, but that's what the note that I've drawn to myself.
Oh, right. Okay. I didn't actually realise that it came up with under review.
I stand to be corrected if someone has a copy of it in front of me and says, no, I've read the wrong map, but I'm pretty sure that's what it says. Otherwise, I don't think I'd have written it down.
I will check. I do have access to different maps that are possibly not for, so maybe I've missed that, but I can check that.
Okay, no, we'll come back to it. Right, the last question's this vexed issue of the Raglan navigation beacon. And we've had some pretty strong submissions from Mr. and Mrs. Wheeler in the past about how the beacon in its current location puts a serious constraint on their ability to build a new dwelling on a different part of their property. There's been lots and lots of ongoing discussion between the Wheelers, different folk at the council, the district council, discussions between the district council and the regional council who own the beacon. We were led to believe by staff that somebody had been advised that this that this needed to change. No, let me get this story correct. That the district plan needed to be addressed first before the beacon could be moved, which we've had a preliminary conversation about that and don't think that's correct for a starting point. The beacon's not owned by the council, the beacon's owned by the regional council, and if the regional council, for whatever reason, wanted to move that beacon, subject to rules about height and so on and so forth, that's their decision, not the district's. And we've clarified that, and to the best of my knowledge, there are conversations going on between the district and the region about how to fix this, and the intention, as I understand it, is to raise the beacon. The problem with that, in terms of the rule that you've drafted, is even if the beacon was moved to an entirely different location, the way that you've drafted the rule says that something's prohibited if it's within a specified view shaft, you know, that starts at point X and goes at a certain angle and so on and so forth. And the problem with that is that even if the beacon were moved and there were no longer a problem, there'd still be a prohibited activity rule requiring a plan change to unwind it, even if it wasn't appropriate. So the question for you is I think everybody accepts that if the beacon is in its current location, then the view of it needs to be protected. That's, you know, it's not a navigation beacon if it's shining through, you know, someone's curtains first or their back wall. But if the beacon is moved, which is, as we understand it, the intention, shouldn't there be a way of describing the view shaft so that if the light moves, the view shaft moves with it? So the prohibition, if you like, is on being in a view shaft that's defined in a certain way based on where the light is, rather than locking it in and saying the view shaft is fixed in this particular position irrespective of where the light is. Because it would be a real shame if I know these things always move slowly, but if certainly more slowly than the submitters would like, if the district and the region finally reached or the region was convinced to raise the beacon, that then the Wheelers would have to go through a plan change, or the council would have to initiate a variation to enable them to build their house. Can you conceive of it that there might be a different way of defining that view shaft so that if the beacon were to be raised, that there wouldn't need to be a plan change to enable their house to be built? Sorry, that's quite long-winded because it's quite hard to put in words,
yeah.
A diagram.
I don't know that there is another way to describe the height restriction plane. Obviously, if you raise the beacon light, and it's the beacon light that needs to be raised, however high you're going to raise it, and you'd need to adjust the light by a particular angle depending on how high you raise that. You're going to need new survey data. And until I could understand how high we're going to lift it and the angle of the light, we couldn't engage anyone to do that work.
Why couldn't you say at least conceptually? Because the height plane is at the moment just says there's a point on the hillside where the light shines from.
Yes.
And the view and the plane is then defined when you look at that from various locations around the harbour to say, can you see it or not? Why can't you define that same process for a different or movable location of where the beacon is?
I see what you mean.
So describing it, rather than locking it into time and space,
yeah,
use the same formula to take account of the fact that the beacon might end up sitting higher, in which case the same calculation is done, but it defines a different view shaft. Is it, at least in theory, is that possible?
Could the survey planes use the light as the basis rather than locations around the bay, so that all the parameters are around the light itself, and so if that moves, that the plane moves with it? Could that be done?
Well, I was just wondering about that, but you'd have to define an end point, wouldn't you? You'd have to, the point is that irrespective of where the beacon ended up, if you were rounding the point coming into the harbour, say, you'd need to be able to see it. I don't know, but I don't want to try and draft it by committee. I'm just asking the question that, I mean, this issue's dragged on for the submitters for years. I think there's a general consensus that if the beacon's able to be moved, they should be able to build their house in the view shaft of the old beacon, with all other things being equal. I think that's a given. I don't think anyone's arguing about that. So I'm trying to explore whether, at least as a matter of principle, that if the regional council moves the light, which they don't need the district council approval to do, it's their prerogative, subject to heights of buildings or whatever. And I haven't looked at that part specifically. But if they agree to move the light upwards, do you agree that in principle, if we can draft something that says if the light moves, the view shaft should be able to move with it, and Mr. and Mrs. Wheeler should be able to build their house without any further worries about the navigation beacon?
How would you then assess compliance to ensure that you don't, if it's not surveyed data, how would you assess compliance? How would a person be able to demonstrate to council that you're not going to obscure?
You'd get a surveyor in and say, I'm obliged to measure a line from where I'm standing to the beacon, and you can't build through that plane. How do they do it now? Someone's got to go out and survey it now. Mr. and Mrs. Wheeler have to go and look at that view shaft map, either interpret themselves or get someone to interpret it for them and say, I can build a house here that's 1.3 metres high.
Yes,
that's not really true. A house. I mean, someone's got to do that interrogation, and if the view shaft is described as some sort of formula, why would that be any different? You've locked it in, essentially saying, you know, the line is the line.
Yeah.
But that line has been calculated by somebody in accordance with survey information. So I'm just asking, we don't have to design that mechanism now. But if everybody's of the view that if the light moves and the house that the Wheelers want to build doesn't obscure sight of the new beacon location, they should be allowed to build that without having to then change the plan to get a redundant provision out of it. And I'm just asking you that, subject to the niceties of how it would be drafted, do you support that approach, or could you conceive of an approach that would allow that to happen?
Yes, I do support that in principle.
Okay. There have been, I know Mr. and Mrs. Wheeler will get to you later, and I'm pretty sure you'll tell us what you told us last time. We suspect that there is that someone that's cleverer with angles than us or than me will be able to conceive of a solution to this. We just need to figure out what it is. And I think the fact that the staff have acknowledged that in principle there's a solution to this, whilst that might be cold comfort in the sense that you'll say, show me the money, at least it looks like there might be a pathway through this, and we've already given you the undertaking that we'll try and find it. So I appreciate that feedback, Ms. Salmon, because I think that'll be helpful.
Mr. Chair, if I could just comment, if the regional council is going to raise the beacon, then, and this could be too simple an explanation, then the rule, the prohibition, wouldn't apply, would it, if there's no interference with the beacon and view shafts, because it's presumably built upwards, and that will allow for something to be built under it, and there'll be a question of fact whether what is proposed would interfere with that view shaft. If it doesn't, and that would be certified by experts, then you can go and build, can't you?
I think that's what that's a much more succinct way of saying it. Depends how high they raise it. They may raise it only by a metre, or they might raise it by 100 metres. Well, they wouldn't raise it by 100 metres, but you know what I mean? It could be a little bit, or it could be a lot.
Yeah, I thought, I got the impression that they were going to raise it to address this problem. So they'd raise it sufficiently for these people to be able to build. I'm just anticipating. Oh,
and that's the challenge is that the way that the rule is written at the moment is that the prohibition relates to a specific view shaft that is fixed. And even if you move the beacon, the rule would still be there as a prohibited activity, because the new house would be poking through it, even though it's not obscuring the light.
Okay. So that shaft itself is defined as to height, etc. It's actually specific.
It's fixed. It's fixed in location.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, in the recommendation in the 42A report, there's been a bit of toing and froing about how to draft it as between the notified and the 42A report. But I think in terms of the questions for the staff at the moment, I think that's as far as we can take it. I think it's helpful that there's a potential solution to this. It just needs to be written down and worked out. And we'll come to that at the end of, and we'll hear from Mr. and Mrs. Wheeler later about their views on everything. So that's helpful, thank you. I suppose the only other question, but it's not really a question, it's a statement. There's been a number of people that have made submissions around things like bed taxes and limiting Airbnbs and so on and so forth. Certainly in terms of the taxation side of things, that's not something that we're able to address. The district plan is about, the uses of land and the building of structures and so on and so forth. It's not a taxation authority. The council can do those sorts of things, presumably, but it's not in the guise of the district plan that it does that. And I know that's the view that Ms. Salmon has reached in the Section 42A report. And I think it's fair to say that that accords with our understanding. If submitters, when they talk to us, have a different view on that, then they should address it. But as we understand the legal position, we don't have the power to impose bed taxes as part of a district plan proposal. If anyone's got a different view, as I've said, they need to tell us about that. All right, I haven't got any further questions. Let's just see if there's anything further from the other panel members that have arisen since we started. Mr. Cooney, anything further from you?
No, thank you.
Mr. Yahoo?
Nothing from me.
Ms. Sedgwick? All right, thank you. Again, apologies for that being quite a laborious process, but we think it's been necessary to get to the bottom of things. So we've done that, and that leads us to you, Mr. Stickney and Mr. Singh, on behalf of Kāinga Ora.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and panel. I'll just, I had a summary, I think a summary statement that you have received from Sandra Kelly.
Yes, we have.
I suspect I can probably do a summary of the summary by your leave.
We like summaries of summaries.
There's a few.
Quite happy with that.
Very
Believe
good.
it or not.
listening with interest this morning, I guess, too, in terms of the character and the context of the submissions that Kāinga Ora made. So I welcome any questions from you on that as we move through. I acknowledge that the relevant matters here we are looking at relate primarily to Raglan. But I wanted to just reinforce or zoom back to a higher altitude in terms of the relevant strategic directions and objectives, particularly chapters 1 and 4 of the proposed district plan, which I consider need to be considered in the context of the discussion that we're having today in these proceedings. And obviously Kāinga Ora, from a level of achieving a compact urban form, a vibrant town centre, and efficient use of land, has an interest and has made submissions on the business town centre zones, and has also sought, as Carolyn has alluded to, the creation of a medium density residential zone sleeving the business and business town centre zones at Raglan. In the context of this discussion today on character as well, another obviously key higher order document is the National Policy Statement on Urban Development Capacity, which is currently under review and I understand will be gazetted sort of middle of this year, I think, or later this year. And obviously that's going to set some direction to council in terms of how they deal with the development of land, intensity of land use, and land use mix and infrastructure and so forth. So those aren't Raglan specific issues, they apply right across the district. The other relevant consideration here is also the development plan, which is set out in the Waikato 2070 growth strategy, which I understand has been adopted by council, I think it was the 19th of May. And that envisages or projects an increased population of 4,500 people in Raglan, I think over the current 4,000, correct me if I'm wrong, within the life of that strategy. So there is clearly a policy direction set by council. That strategy will inform and be given effect to through the district plan in terms of an increased population within Raglan. In terms of the submission points, a number of the submission points seeking controls and preservation or management of development, I think one of the big issues that I'm picking up on today is really the obviously divergent views perhaps, but whether the emphasis is on managing change and managing character versus protecting it. And I think in the context of those higher order policy documents which do envisage growth, there's going to need to be some decisions made on how the council will approach that. If they move forward with a plan change or a subsequent variation. Just turning quickly to policy 4.5.14, which is really in terms of Kāinga Ora's submission points, probably the most detailed one that details dealing with the actual policy framework and provisions governing Raglan. I concur with Ms. Salmon in terms of her recommendation to remove the reference to the town centre character statements and incorporate the outcomes of those character statements into the policy. And I think just looking at the issue we've had today, and I think it was picked up on about the use of the terms eclectic and artistic within the policy, those sorts of statements which may well be contained within guidelines or character statements obviously do raise some concerns in my view in terms of interpretation, and I concur with the panel member on that. I think therefore really it is a case of some tailored redrafting of some of these policies pertinent to Raglan, and the associated relief with that may be some additional assessment criteria in key areas which are really targeted to manage built form and the character that will evolve over time in Raglan. So just summing up, it's just to put on the table those higher order policy directions in terms of growth for Raglan, the Waikato 2070 strategy and growth projections, and how those can be integrated into the discussion on character, which has been had today. I have got some thoughts on that, so I'd welcome any questions from the committee on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stickney. Let's see if there's any questions of you. Ms. Te Aho.
Yeah, so just at the end there, you said you did have some ideas around how we might, how there might be provisions to protect character without the words that you've critiqued. What were your ideas?
What I've been thinking through this morning, and actually the other day when I read the Section 42A report again and the recommendations in that, I think there needs to be a very clear filtering process if you're going to look at Raglan, a filtering process in respect of what the district plan can reasonably manage or protect versus what the district plan really isn't an appropriate mechanism to use, and that needs to be filtered fairly early on in a process, almost a sieve process right at the start, to say what can we realistically expect out of the district plan to manage. Then it comes down to looking at those key areas of Raglan that have some character, and I'm primarily focusing on built form, things like reserves, streets. A lot of that can also be managed through other mechanisms such as reserve management plans, asset management plans, etc. So that filtering process at the start should be able to identify where there may be other options or complementary tools that can assist in managing or protecting character, as the case may be. Then it's really a case of looking at those areas that you have identified, what the values of those are to residents and also to visitors to Raglan, and possibly looking at some tailored controls, be it some overlays or precinct controls over key identified areas, and I'm thinking more probably the town centre and the areas sleeving the town centre for built form, and possibly the concrete silos as well out at the point. And looking at some more tailored controls that would apply to development within those areas. So leaving the overall district-wide policy framework, which will manage growth and guide growth, accepting that growth will occur as per your growth strategy, but zooming in on some of those areas with some overlays and possibly additional assessment criteria or controls that will just safeguard some of the character that's been identified in terms of built urban form moving forward.
So other than those, say, if we were just to take your ideas, other than those key targeted areas where we look for, appropriate and specific wording to protect issues of character, it would just be a free-for-all where you could have your mix of housing options? Is that what
no, there would still obviously
be kind of some overarching expectation for the whole of the area? So that it's not open.
Yep, I think that comes through your filtering process in terms of, and I think there was a discussion, a brief, Mr. Coombs might have alluded to it at the start in terms of some of those natural character elements and landscape elements which may not change or are not as influenced by urban form, etc. They're the context to the settlement itself, and through district plan zoning, other controls, they may be appropriate as they are, but they're not likely to change. I get the feeling reading the submissions, it's probably more the town centre and the urban form and people's experiences when they're living and visiting Raglan. That is the crux of the issue, and also obviously the coastal reserves and others, but there are other mechanisms to protect those. So by way of example, to hopefully answer your question, it may be in the town centre, on the main street and main street and side streets, there may be some overlays over those business town centre zonings which have specific controls in respect of assessment criteria. Height might be another one in some areas that is managed. So it's just a finer grain level of control if you're proposing to do any development within that particular area.
Thank you.
Cedric?
Yes, thank you very much. Given Raglan's difficulty in topography, and it makes sense, it would appear, to build around the town centre itself. But I'm wondering, is what you're suggesting infill in the town centre, or are you suggesting greenfields development?
The submissions from Kāinga Ora, which covered the district at a district-wide level, and for each settlement, clearly are focused on intensification and brownfields development.
Right.
In the case of Raglan, given the population projections in the 2070 strategy, that's obviously a decision that will need to be made as part of any further exercise. I suspect it'll be back on the table for discussion, but Kāinga Ora's view, and I concur absolutely with their position in terms of urban form as intensification and also giving more life to the existing town centres through that intensification is a key planning outcome that should be aimed for.
Yeah, thank you for that, and I did get that tone from your submissions.
Thank you.
The 2070 strategy talks about Raglan doubling its growth to 8,500, which does not necessarily mean that will happen in the next 10 years. So there is a time lag here. How urgent do you feel that this is, or what is the significance of the urgency for you in order to retain the character of the town as well?
We've had some discussions, and we've started discussions with Waikato District Council. I think it was alluded to previously on medium density housing and urban form, and that's going to we'll be reporting back, I understand, later on this year back to the panel. I accept that, yes, in the context of Waikato 2070 over the time frame, it's actually not a significant number of new residents or dwellings on a per annum basis. But I do believe in terms of this whole this character issue, it will be important to set the framework up for growth taking a longer term view, rather than getting to the end of each 10-year cycle for the district plan, reviewing where you've got to, are the outcomes, have they been achieved? I think it's preferable to take a longer term view in setting up the character of the settlement and monitoring the outcomes on a reasonably regular basis. So I would recommend taking a longer term view for planning for that population growth than the life of the district plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Cedric. Mr. Cooney?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Stickney, for that. I think that was very, very helpful indeed. Thank you. You've obviously given it some thought about what we discussed
Yes.
earlier this morning. Is it your view that the topography and the town centre are what define the character of Raglan? Is that what you seem to be suggesting?
And Mr. Coombs may have some. I'm not an expert in this field, so this is from my few years of experience in a planner. The existing extent of the built form in Raglan and its footprint relative to the backdrop of Raglan in the coastal setting is really, in my opinion, the starting point for its character. So it's the existing footprint and its spatial layout within that setting.
And are you talking about the town centre when you say that? Or? Yeah.
Yes, correct. And the area, the surrounding residential areas, yes.
Yeah. Just at the moment, there's limited opportunity for development, isn't there, in Reglan? And as you say, yes, you rely on brownfield development type projects. Yeah.
Yes.
And this discussion you're having with council about medium density development, that would be looking at some sort of a plan change to extend boundaries and etc. to provide for it. Is that what you're saying?
It would be to create a new zone within the existing, surrounding the existing town centre zone to provide for higher density housing, as Kāinga Ora presented on at the residential hearings a while ago. Correct.
Oh, okay.
And that's in the scope of their submission that they had, because they identify not only provisions but also the geographic extent of that medium density zone.
Correct.
Oh, okay. We've already had a discussion on that. But do you visualise in order to implement that, some sort of a plan change for Raglan?
That would be through my understanding, and Carolyn, correct me if I'm wrong, that would be just through the current district plan process, not an additional plan change. That would come out in the decisions.
Yeah. No, I think we've already sort of had preliminary discussions on that. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to move off that side of things. But at the moment, any brownfield development, you'd say you'd have regard to the special character or characteristics of the area. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I'm suggesting is if the council was to initiate a subsequent plan change or do a master plan or a structure plan for Raglan, that there may well be some additional controls that would regulate and better provide for managing that special character of Raglan through some more tailored assessment criteria.
Yeah, but at the moment, leaving that aside, and we're talking about brownfield development in Raglan and what Kainga Ora may be doing, isn't it buildings around the town centre are discretionary or restricted discretionary?
Restricted discretionary, correct.
Yeah, and multi-unit development is restricted discretionary in the wider area.
Under the plan, it would be restricted discretionary, correct.
Is it possible to put in there some assessment criteria to have regard to the character issues?
It is possible. I think it's a case, though, of whether you apply those provisions to the entire area that you're looking at, or whether you are targeting it to key transport or pedestrian corridors, or whether you are just going to take a blanket approach and apply it right across the area. And that's where I think further analysis would be merited.
But being a discretionary assessment matter, it just depends on the way you word it, wouldn't you? It doesn't need another study. It would be the crafting the proper wording there.
I think it depends on the outcomes you want to achieve.
Well, I suppose you want to try and allow development, but make it sensitive to certain attributes that Raglan has.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah. Okay. Thanks.
I hope that helps. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's helpful.
Just one question for me, Mr. Stickney. You've put quite a lot of store in the Waikato 2070 document, and you've said it's a policy of council and so forth. To the extent that document is inconsistent with future-proof and/or the RPS, how much weight do we give Waikato 2070 in an RMA policy sense?
We've and this is, I think with the regional policy statement, I mean, it's fair to say that it doesn't provide a lot of guidance for the Waikato district. It certainly provides a lot more guidance for Hamilton in terms of number of houses per hectare, etc. So the RPS is currently relatively light. And future-proof, now that document is perhaps getting a little bit long in the tooth, and it was prepared at a point in time. I think the guidance will come from the NPS and its gazettal, which I understand is around about August from what I've heard, and that will provide, I think, a lot more direction to council, and whether that aligns, whether it aligns with 2070, I don't know in terms of what that document will actually direct, but that will become the overriding document, I think, that will then guide the RPS and any updates to future-proof moving forward.
But then wouldn't Waikato 2070 then have to fall into line behind those two documents rather than be the other way around? Because Waikato 2070 is not an RMA document, it's a policy document of council. But in RMA world, it's a pretty limited value, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, yes, it's a difficult one because I take the view that the Waikato 2070 is prepared using much more up-to-date information. It's obviously a much more recent document than the RPS and future-proof, and the technical information underpinning it in terms of population demand and growth, and the other technical studies will be more current. So although it is not an RMA document, and the regional policy statement obviously takes precedence over it, we've got a situation where the Waikato 2070 strategy probably has does have a lot more currency and than the RPS, with the information that was based on, and the issues they were dealing with when it was prepared.
So would it be fair to say it's the information that is drawn from to inform Waikato 2070?
Correct.
That's the important thing, not the fact that council's adopted it as a policy document.
It's the currency of the information.
The currency of the information. Okay, now that's what I thought the situation was. I sort of clarify that. All right,
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Sydney. Nothing further from me, and I don't think there's anything further from the panel. So thanks for your patience, and thanks for your evidence. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Lawson, are you all set to go?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
We certainly can.
Good, thank you. Yes, so maybe carrying on with that 2070 discussion, I'm not sure whether the panel's aware that Raglan viewed that new document as something of a surprise, because we did have consultation on it in November, which showed a very different plan for Raglan. And since then, extra areas have been added and extra roads have been added that nobody in Raglan that I've talked to seem to be aware of, even on the community board or even our councillor. So our councillor is on the call at the moment, so she might want to correct that if I'm wrong. So and it also seems to me that the 2070 plan is an exact opposite of the case that's being made in the Section 42 report, saying, hey, we can't change things without talking to everyone. And the 2070 plan effectively has changed things without talking to anyone, as far as I can make out. So there seems to be, I appreciate there's a difference between an RMA document and a policy document, but there also seems to be a move to incorporate the 2070 plan as has just been discussed as part of this district plan, and certainly to influence it. And the worry, it seems to me, is that the character of Raglan is being lost under the current operative plan. And that's why there have been so many submissions, I think, in particular, relating to the buildings that are being erected on the corner of Winery Road and Stewart Street, because it was seen that it infringed the operative plan in so many ways. And yet again, there was no consultation with the neighbours, with the councillor, with the community board, or anyone in Raglan. This was an approval that was given. And it does change the character of Raglan because it's a much larger block of buildings than currently has existed in that area. And it's prominent in its viewpoint. So you see it as you come down the main road into Raglan. You see it from the footbridge as you come across from the campground and that side. And you see it when you look down from the centre of town down the main street, or from the main street down Winery Road. So that character is being changed under the current plan. And the proposed plan doesn't seem to improve at all on that protection. And that's why so many of us have been saying that really we need some protection of Raglan's character before it's lost. Another example is the development that's likely to take place in the Lorenzen Bay structure plan area on the edge of town, where between Greenslade Road and Lorenzen Bay Road, the current rural character of the area is being lost. And I was interested to hear Summer talk about the seaside village character of Reglan, and to see that it is in the plan still as relating to Rangitahi, but not in the rest of the plan. The current operative plan mentions the seaside village character many times, but the proposed plan doesn't. And in changing the infill and the redevelopment and expanding the town, then at some stage you're going to lose that seaside village character. You can't have a seaside village character which is part of a city. And we seem to be heading more in that direction than the village direction. And there was talk earlier of a backlash from developers, but I think there's also been this backlash from people who are concerned about Raglan. And it's not just a new development, and it's back looking to, well, probably even before that, but certainly 2001 when Raglan Naturally was first prepared. Gabrielle will be talking a lot more about Raglan Naturally, but certainly Raglan Naturally at that time talked about the importance of conserving views, conserving buildings. There was a 2003 plan which was put to the community board suggesting ways in which the character of Raglan might be preserved. And Wed's mentioned that in the submission. And there seems to be consistently a call for conservation, but there never seems to have been a good time for it to actually be implemented, which is a concern to me when I hear the council talking about the resources needed to do it. But I was very pleased to hear the line of questioning that you were following earlier, suggesting that maybe it needed to come forward as part of the district plan. So that's the suggestion that WED has put forward in saying that really we've already got the district plan split into 2 stages, and it would be consistent with that to go for 3 stages and actually do a proper job on this and actually get the job done before more of a character is lost. And in the meantime, there needs to be some restriction so that the sort of development that's taken place on the corner of Stewart Street and Winery Road isn't allowed to happen in future, which is why the suggestion has been put in by many submitters, including WED, that there should be notified consents if anything infringes the district plan, and seeing that as a way forward to actually protect what's here at the moment. Because I caught the bus into Hamilton yesterday and I noticed on the way that one of the old batches that was there last week has been flattened this week, and my guess is from the developments elsewhere in town that that's going to be another 2-story development. And there has been discussion this morning as to whether 2-story or 1-story. It's not a new suggestion that the corner buildings need to be 2-story to provide some character to a town, but I'm not sure that that's the character of Raglan. Raglan is a human sized town. It's not a town where you look up to the skyscrapers around, and what might be suitable for Taupo is not necessarily suitable for Raglan. There has been mention of the bed tax as a solution. It seems to me that the bed tax, although not necessarily a district plan issue, it is a solution to the district plan issue of a shortage of affordable accommodation. To some extent, we've got a temporary reprieve on that with COVID-19, and many of the places that were being let as Airbnb are now becoming available to locals to let, but presumably that's only going to be a temporary reprieve. And the other thing that I thought I might mention is that the coastal walkway was discussed. This is part of a 2016 proposal from council when they looked at their tracks around the district, and they came up with a strategy. At that stage, it was just a broad line on a map, and it seems to me that a mistake's been made in the case of the one round Cox's Bay that the Kerville family were complaining about, in that it's halfway up the cliff, and I can't imagine that anyone would actually want to put a walkway in there. The only logical place for a walkway along that bit of coast would be actually as a boardwalk along the foot of the cliff. So that's more or less what I in summary wanted to say. So I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Lawson. Let's just see if there's any questions for you. Ms. Tiaho?
No, I don't have any questions for you, but thank you for your submissions.
Ms. Sedgwick?
No, thank you. Very clear. Thank you.
Mr. Cooney?
No, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Thank you.
Just one from me, Mr. Lawson. If your submission was reasonably forthright on the idea of a structure plan for Raglan, whether it's a structure plan or some other plan that achieves the same purpose, do you have a view, having heard what we talked about this morning, both in terms of adding to the existing policies and so forth, making character a matter of discretion in the relevant rules at one end of the spectrum, versus a plan variation as part of this process? You mentioned before you thought that was a good idea. Do you think it's reasonable from your point of view that that could be achieved in putting aside the COVID issues that Mr. Gauntlet, I think, quite fairly made? All things being equal, could you see that process being brought to fruition by, let's say, the end of this year? Or is that just dreaming? So you might have to start again. You're on mute, Mr. Lawson.
Must have pressed the button. I wasn't on mute. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot which would be involved in a structure plan, I think, because if you're moving from a population of 3,000 to 8,500, for example, we were talking to the wastewater treatment people, water care, about the consent that they're planning to put in, and they're very uncertain as to what population they're designing for or where that population is going to be. So these uncertainties are already coming in, which would make it useful to do the job quickly and to get it done. I don't see why it shouldn't be done by the end of the year, but as has been discussed before, I think someone was saying the resources aren't necessarily available in council, and that's been the problem all along with this plan, that the planning resource has been in short supply, and very often there's just been consultants who have been brought in for a short period and then their expertise has gone again, which I think is the difficulty that you and all of us are having with this plan. So if that can be solved, then yes, it's possible.
So if and we won't decide that today, but if whatever we decide by way of more homework needing to be done, you'd be willing to participate in that process, whether it's the one that Mr. Cooney was exploring or the more fundamental review. That's something that you would see as being a valuable next step, irrespective of what the final output would be.
Yes, because we need to have some idea of what the implications are of all the proposals that are being made, and so far they've just come in very piecemeal, and we don't see the big picture as to how much we need in the way of power or roads or parking or what we do to conserve an area or any of these issues, even down to how many waves there are and whether all the people who are coming to Raglan want to surf and whether they're not going to find that they can because there aren't enough waves to do it on. So all these issues should be brought together and looked at.
Okay, no, that's fine. Thank you very much. And thank you for your submission and the information that you've provided to us. It's been helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
There's no compunction on people to stay. They're welcome to stay, obviously, but if they have something else to do, then no need to seek permission or whatever else. Just like your regular hearing, feel free to leave the room or stay as you see fit. Which leads us to Reglan naturally. Ms. Parson, please.
Hello there, thank you. Good afternoon. So to just say, first of all, that I'm quite new to this whole process. and that hopefully I bring my enthusiasm and fresh eyes to it, but maybe not necessarily my experience in the district plan process. Just to introduce myself a little bit, I'm the current chair of the Ragland Community Board. I've been on the community board for 3.5 years. I've also been working for the last 2 to 3 years on Raglan Naturally, which is our community planning process. And I've also been involved as closely as possible with the council and their blueprint planning, which is, yeah. So, and I just wanted to say just big respect to all the people that are involved in the district plan process. And I can just see that it's really a big piece of work, and just really appreciate your work, Summer, on the work that you've done in the report. Yeah, just really appreciating being part of this. So I suppose I wanted to speak more specifically to one of my points, which was about a structure plan. And so what I've got here, I might read out a little bit, some notes that I have, but the structure plan to me connects to the submissions related to the character statement, very much connected. And in that submission, I referenced the Raglan character. I think that it was a very valuable workshop that we had, and the report from Isthmus. There were some quite key people from the community at that workshop, and maybe whilst it wasn't fully representative, I think we had some really key people in the room, and it was a really good workshop. I feel very clearly through my work over the last few years, where I've got pretty stuck in, to be honest, into Raglan and how the local government works and the community planning and all the, you know, I've really kind of immersed myself in it. I feel pretty clearly that Raglan does need a structure plan, and that it needs to be informed by our community planning, the council blueprint planning, the Raglan special character study, and it also needs to reference, you know, plans like Waikato 2070 and other council strategies and policies, including the district plan. And like Phil referred to, other national policies that would relate and have an impact on Raglan. And for this reason, I really support Summer's recommendations that to the hearing panel, that they consider recommending to the council that it initiate, I suppose, a further process to understand the character of Raglan, and then to develop the rules and policies that would need to come out from that. So I also feel, and I thought it was really great what you said, Mr. Mitchell, about that earlier, that I feel very strongly that the council, this is a council responsibility. They have a responsibility to work with their district-wide strategies and policies, and to work, of course they've got to work across the district, but they have to work closely with each individual community, which I've also been involved recently in some of the council long-term planning workshops, and I can see that it's a real challenge because it's a big district with many small communities who are quite unique. And there seems to be a tension, an ongoing tension to kind of do the business as usual, but to get that real forward planning happening as well. I think the blueprint planning has really helped the council with this, because it's really helped them understand the individual communities further, but that needs to keep, that work has not stopped. And that needs to, the blueprint planning needs to continue, and they're very aware of that. Just to let you know, in the local area blueprints, I don't know if you know much about the blueprint planning, but in every local area blueprint, it has identified that the council needs to work with the communities to develop their special identities. So it's a piece of work that they've actually already identified. The council have also supported Raglan with our community planning, and I think in some ways they see that Raglan naturally is our kind of local blueprint. And I think, to me, we've done so much work in Raglan over the last few years with Raglan naturally, with the blueprinting, with developing our relationships with the council and understanding more about Raglan, that it seems kind of sensible and the right thing to do to work with the district plan to ensure that this work is not lost and it's actually supported by the district plan. We're aware, of course, that there are some large developments happening with Rangatahi and also Lorenzen Day development. And then there were a couple of others noted in the Waikato 2070 plan for further down the line. So I think through the community planning process, it was heard very strongly from the wider community that Raglan is changing, and there was quite a lot of concern in the community around the changes, the impacts of growth and the impacts on the character and identity. It was one of the strongest things that came through. So to me, this is very important work that we're talking about. I know the district plan is just one piece, you know, one plan to support our work, and whether anything has changed in the district plan or not, we are going to be going ahead anyway with our community planning and with the council blueprint planning, and I suppose working with the council to look at developing a structure plan anyway. So that's going to be happening. It would be a shame if that was happening, and it's happening right at the moment. And, you know, possibly over the next, you know, 6 months to a year, that we consolidate all this work that we've all been doing, and then it's not even held strongly in the district plan. It just seems like a total waste to me. And then I just really wanted to a bit more of a kind of philosophical feel, because I do that sometimes. I think we're talking about environmental and community well-being really at the bottom of all this. And the district plan, from what I see, in my limited experience, is a tool to support these well-beings. So my thought was, let's not let it restrict our learning and our developing together, but let it support it. And really, it's our collective responsibility as a community and the council to understand the things that are subtle and ensure that they're not lost. It's all very easy to work with the things that are very clear, but in fact, the things that the community is saying are really important are kind of those subtle things. So we've got to actually do this work, whether it's hard or not, and we will be doing it anyway. And I think we need to be working, which is what we have been doing, is working very closely, or as closely as we can, with hapu around this and building relationships. So that's a big part of what we're doing. So that's what I'd kind of prepared before I'd heard the panel and the introductory work. So I think there was a couple of things. What I'm hearing is that there's possibly kind of 2 or 3 ways to go from here. And I really appreciated, Mr. Mitchell, your clear questions that you were putting to the panel and to the meeting about, you know, what would be involved and how long would it take, and what could the process look like if we in fact do this work thoroughly. I just wanted to say that I think it is achievable, without a doubt it's achievable, and you know, that it's achievable to develop the robust provisions. I'm sure it's achievable. I personally, as the chair of the board and as the Raglan Naturally coordinator, very much support this work wholeheartedly, and I'd be very happy to work as much as I can with the council and the district plan team and Summer to really understand what the next steps would be. I can see the dilemma a little bit, and I wonder whether it would be possible to come up with something which is an interim measure but some further work. So I don't personally have the answer to that. I heard the concerns from Summer and Will about resourcing and things. And obviously with COVID, that's created some change. But what I want to say is that the council, is some of the main pieces of work that they're already working on, is working on the blueprint planning and their long-term planning. It's already a piece of work that they're not going to drop because it's very relevant to their long-term planning. And I see this being very connected to all of that work. Like it's basically all the same. It just needs to be brought together. And whether that's a structure plan that it's brought into, or I don't know. I think that needs to happen, but that could take a bit longer. It depends how committed. I think that what would the process look like? Or I would say that 6 months could be a bit short if you're talking about bringing this all together. Maybe 8 months is more realistic, but we've done a lot of work already. Like there has been so much work. If we can't bring this together quite quickly in a way as a community with the council, then what the hell have we been doing? Sorry about the language, but you know, it's like this is about the rubber meeting the road, right? We can have our aspirational community plans and blueprints and everything, but if it doesn't make sense and we can't see it in the district plan, then really it's a shame. So I think it would be about the council and the community board and Raglan naturally and Hapu working very closely together. I think the council would need to be very committed to working with us, and I think that the community board and the community can bring a lot of kind of resource to it in a sense. We're maybe not experts, but we can certainly bring time and resource to it. So I might just stop there because I could keep going on, but I don't want to go on too much. But I just really want to say that I feel like it's very important work that we're talking about. It's an important time to be doing it. And if there is a possibility of just kind of working together for another 6 months or so to really nail it, I feel like there would be a lot of value that will come from, in many ways, from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Parson. That's very clear. Let's see if there's any questions for you. Mr. Cooney?
Just one, you say you're working on a structure plan, or is it a special character overlay? How do you see it?
So we have not started working on a structure plan with the council yet. If that's what you were asking, we've been working on our community planning and on the blueprint planning, but I see that the next step for that is to have a structure plan, because that just seems the next step. In terms of an overlay, can you just clarify what your question is?
It's just I'm talking planning language now. A planning overlay is a structure plan could theoretically be called an overlay, or you can call a document that sits behind the zone provisions and has special rules and controls is usually what's generally considered an overlay provision. So
so I think that would be up to I suppose that the panel or the district plan team to decide what would be needed in the plan, whether you call it an overlay or an appendix or a character statement or a structure plan or that's not my expertise. That's but I'm certainly happy to help work on it.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Tiaho?
Thanks, Gabrielle. Just a quick question. You talk about the necessity for a further process and a structure plan, and you would have heard us talking this morning about different ways to approach, the challenge of ensuring that the special character of Raglan is protected, but finding the appropriate planning way to do that. And so you've just talked about a few options there. One of the other ways that was kind of talked about or flagged this morning was to work with what's in the notified version of the plan, but to build more specific words or mechanisms into what's been notified without going too far beyond the scope to, cause challenges there. Do you think that it is necessary to go through a further process and do that structure plan, or do you think you could achieve what you want to achieve through making changes to what has been notified?
I think that either would be good. I think either would be better than what's there, right? Like what we're wanting to build on is we're wanting to build on what's there and make it more appropriate. So I had a thought that just to be clear, I don't feel like we need to get a structure plan done to understand the special character and to create robust provisions in the district plan, because the structure plan is quite a big piece of work, as I understand. So it might be that the work to further understand the special character and develop the robust provisions is a step of work towards a structure plan, but it doesn't need to, the structure plan doesn't need to be done. So I think that there is, I just had a thought, well, even at a minimum, even if we talk the operative district plan, we looked at what's in there and the existing provisions, and we took the recent report done by Mr. Coombs or Isthmus, and perhaps looked at some, just took a little bit of time to perhaps look a little bit more closely at whether it's Raglan naturally and the blueprinting, and almost came up with, I see it as kind of an interim character statement. It doesn't mean to say that, what I'm saying is that we might do some further work as a community with the council and develop something more thorough, but it's not to say that we couldn't do something quite well in the meantime without having to do that big. So it'd be really, I think it's almost a little bit of work that needs doing to actually look at how, just how thorough it would be to do that kind of interim work, and is it worth it, or is it really worth going that extra step? And I think, I don't know the answer to that, but I think it would be worth looking at both options.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Sedgwick.
No, I don't have any more questions, but thank you for presenting so passionately.
Just one from me, Ms. Parson. You obviously wear several hats. You mentioned that you're chair of the Raglan Community Board, and you've also talked about Raglan Naturally. I've read Raglan Naturally's submission, and I've gone online and looked at the pretty interesting website. I must say it's quite interesting to read. But what is Raglan Naturally? Not the document, but the group. What's its status? What's its organisational structure? Is it an incorporated society? Is it a group of local residents that get together? I read who the supporters are, and you mentioned the district council. But what sort of, are they members of your group? Do they encourage it? Do they fund it? Can you just, without getting into huge detail, can you just explain to me a little bit about what the grouping is and how it's structured?
Yeah, sure. I'll try and do that as briefly as possible. So Raglan Naturally was our community plan that was created back in 2001. And then 3 years ago, a couple of members on the community board picked up Raglan Naturally and said, we kind of really need this community plan. Let's check with the community if they want it to be reviewed. So the community, we held a meeting, and the community very clearly said, yes, we would like our community plan to be refreshed. So a committee was formed really from people putting their hands up. So this whole process has been a community-led process. The community has owned it, has been very supported and funded a little bit by the council. Technically, it sits under the community board as a subcommittee of the community board. So we needed someone to hold responsibility for it. So that's where it sits at the moment. So a committee has been, people have come and gone, the committee, like they do in these community, it's all basically been volunteer work, apart from myself as coordinator. But there's been a committee that's met regularly over the last 2 or 3 years that have actually brought together a revised community plan. Just to let you know, because it may be of interest, is that we've got the plan. We could just stop there, but we're like, no way, we're not stopping. This is just the beginning. So in fact, what we're planning to do is we held a few workshops late last year, and we decided that there is value for Raglan Naturally to continue as an organisation. So we're going to set up as under a trust as a co-governance organisation. So co-governance with hapu and the wider community. So it's quite a new model, possibly across New Zealand, but even for Raglan. And we will be working very closely with the community board to support the implementation of our community plan and to get funding to support that. So it'll be working very closely with the community board. Like a community board member will be a trustee of the trust and working with the council. So it's really a way to get stuff done, which the council aren't going to fund. Or that, yeah, so that's where it sits. And
Okay,
just
no,
to let you know, there's been,
helpful.
yeah, I could go on, but I won't.
No, that's clear. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right, I don't think we've got any more questions. Ms. Parson, thanks for your submission. Thanks for expressing it so clearly. I think we understand where you're coming from. And like Mr. Lawson, you're welcome to stay, welcome to go and do something else if you wish. That's entirely up to you. But thank you.
Thanks very much.
Ms. Greensill. Is Ms. Greens? Oh, there she is. She's still there.
Kia ora, everyone.
Kia ora.
Everything that I put in my submission has almost been covered by everybody else. So I totally support Wed, John Lawson and Gabrielle's comments. I did want to pick up on, what is character? What is the special character of Reglan? And as a person who was born here, I guess the character is the sea. For me, it's a sight, the sound, it's a smell of the sea. It's that coming down the hill, there's a distinctive main street with tree line, there's particular things that actually make Raglan Raglan. It's got historic colonial buildings, and I guess up until about 2 years ago, the character was, I guess it was sort of, about 2 years ago, I think they started a development on Wainui Road, which was, to me, totally out of character. What it brings in is a whole new block of, square blocks right on your face. And, those sorts of things are a real concern while we go through this process. The plan, resource consents are being basically dealt with, allowing characters to change, because these things take time. So that particular development went through. I think it breached a lot of the rules that were in the previous plan. And now we have that as part of our character. I have nothing against two-story buildings, but they certainly don't. They need to be sited in the right places, and siting them right there on the foreshore, where everyone has to drive past, when the rest of the town is sort of, single story mainly, with some two-story in the main street. I think that is one of the things that destroys the character of the town. So I'm with everyone else on this idea of multi-story buildings not really being in the main area of the Ragland township. It just destroys that special character of a colonial town, I guess. And access to the water, I think that's the other thing. It's people come to Raglan for the sea. That's why they turn up. As soon as they hit the town hall, top of the town hill, that's what they see. That's its character. And unfortunately for us, we have too many people coming now. There's 27 surf clubs. There are not that many waves to ride, so accidents on the water. We have heaps of, tourist establishments. A lot of people have relocated from Auckland, or they haven't relocated, they've just bought houses. And so we have an abundance of Airbnbs when we should be actually building houses for people. So hopefully this shock that COVID has given us will allow us to have some of those landlords probably relook at the investments, and hopefully there'll be some houses released for the local community, because they are needed in our town. I did put something else in my submission on this, and it was really to do with, I guess, the extent of what are we talking about when we're talking about part 4 of this plan. I guess we're on part 4, aren't we? Not only the town character, but as Māori people in this area, we have the only land that's available that everyone looks longingly at, because it's undeveloped right in town. And a lot of the rules and ideas and policies have been considered other people's needs rather than our own. For example, in the towns, you're allowed to have residential care, all those sorts of things, but it's not, you know, retirement villages, community facilities, etc. What we want is those same things on Māori land. So the Māori freehold land policy, I think, has come in the plan, and hopefully we will be able to have exactly what the township can have. The only other issue that I raised also was Te Hei Mauri Ora plan, which was a bit like Reglan naturally. It was the aspirations of our people. We did a plan in 1996. It was presented to the district, to the planning commissioners at the time, and we were allowed to have particular activities on our land. This is now 2 plans down. We're now onto this new proposed plan, and those activities are being removed because our land, we've lost our PAR zone, and we're right in the town district, and we've now been zoned as rural, and we now have coastal overlays and inundation overlays and all sorts of other overlays coming over us that removes the activities that we planned many years ago. And we're only halfway through the projects. We have 3 to go, and they're probably the most important ones. So that's an issue that is just in the townscape, I guess. So I don't know what's going to happen about that. We would like an exemption. We'd like those activities to remain. We had facilities for surface water activities, recreation, education facilities. We've built all those, public toilets, campground. What we haven't built is a restaurant, conference facilities, which Ragland needs. Those are the 2 issues that we haven't really dealt with. So apart from that, I don't really have much more to say. I just support what everyone else is saying about we need to look after our character. There's been a lot of work on Reglan naturally, as Gabriel has said. That's where the aspirations of the people lies. And council has had a long time to get its head around a lot of the stuff. And they really need to step up and allow Reglan to actually put its aspirational plan in place so we can develop in the way that we want to. And really, you know, all growth is not great in some places. Kia ora koutou.
Thank you, Ms. Greensell. That's pretty clear. Let's see if there's any questions for you. Ms. Te Aho?
Angeline, did you participate in the process that led to the Isthmus report? I was just trying to check the attendance list, but I just ran out of time.
I attended a workshop at the town hall where I think we put our overlay of our various iwi on the plan. If I'm thinking that's the same workshop, it's the only one I attended. Is that Gabriel will be able to say whether that was a plan or not? I'm seeing she'll not. Yes, that's the one. So we had Ngāti Mahanga, Tainui, Tama Inupo, and Ngāti Whakamarurangi in the room. And we just put our overlay there because for us it's very difficult to actually confine ourselves to a small wood-like character when we're talking just about the town, when in fact the people are as important as the place. Yeah.
Do you think that that was a sufficient opportunity for you to get across your whakaaro as hapu representatives, tangata whenua, about how to protect or enhance the character?
I don't know whether we got into too much detail, but I think there's been a lot of work, as Gabriel says, with hapu, with the town about what we want. So, you know, there's a lot of work that's already been done, and I think we still need a little bit more work to do, but not that much.
Right.
So it's about getting the council on board to really put some wheels on. These things have been going on for far too long.
Right. So if you, in an ideal world, if the council was able to resource a process, in your view, because you've got a lot of experience in dealing in resource management issues, what would be the ideal process?
I actually think, you know, the district plan is what has got statutory, you know, it's got teeth. And so for me, if we could actually build into this particular plan the things that people want, I don't think it'll take too much change to actually get what some of our aspirations are in there. I don't think it'll be difficult. If we start going down the other plan of variations and other things, that's going to be costly, time consuming. And in the meantime, we have developers hanging around the fringes who will actually use the current plan to come in and start applying for consents to develop zones around our space, and it's already happening. It's all really in the 2070 growth strategy. I noticed some more places that are going to be places for residences. If we delay things, I think we're going to miss some opportunities and also see changes that we're not happy with. So, you know, some amendments to the plan would be the simplest. Things that people have recommended, look at them seriously instead of just ignoring them or saying, no, we don't accept those amendments.
And my final question, I don't want to hog all the time. You may have heard the submissions and the discussion that we had with the representative for Kāinga Ora, whose key suggestion, I guess, was to have specific targeted areas where character might play more of a role, and also in a desire for Kāinga Ora in its kind of overarching desire to create more mixed, a more mixed range of housing options. They are looking to intensify, particularly in, you know, in the middle of town. What's your whakaaro on that idea of having kind of key targeted areas where maybe character's protected and other areas where intensification is allowed?
Probably about 2 miles out of town, you could intensify, I suppose. I'm not sure, but coming right into town, it was one of the questions I had when people said we were going to have so many people, so many thousands of people, and we're going to, I'm just trying to find the point that I made about that, is I didn't know where that was going to happen. Because when you look around Raglan, there are some quarter-acre sections. A lot of them have been infilled already. And if we're going to be infilling, hopefully it's not going to be 4-story buildings in the middle of single stories, because you have shade, you have a whole lot of other things. It's going to be really carefully designed. There's going to be, and those sort of things come out in the plan, what you can and cannot do. But just looking around Raglan at the moment, I can't think of anywhere where, apart from having another couple of houses on the back of some of these quarter-acre sections, that you could intensify by building upwards. That would be a problem, I think, for some of us building more than 2 stories. Yeah, so sorry I can't help you because I'm unsure of where they think they're going to be putting everything in the town.
Just one final thing, if I can. Some of the wording that was proposed by the Section 42 reporting officer was, I think it was artistic and eclectic, to describe the character, to try and encapsulate that special character in words, and there's been a bit of discussion about those words, and you used the word colonial town. Somebody else has talked about the seaside village nature. Do you have any other words that you think kind of encapsulates the special character of Raglan for you?
It used to be sleepy, actually, once. Everyone talked about sleepy Raglan with black sand. Nobody wanted to come to us. It's not that anymore, unfortunately. Seaside village, definitely. That was the sort of feel we had until we started to get these great big buildings going up. And we really don't want to lose our character because we are people of the sea. We have a wharf that we've now got, the council's got about 2 million or something to upgrade. So that's actually adding to the scape of our space. And the things in character with the place, I have no problem with. But when we start seeing, especially built environments come, and you can just see there's Mount Manganui coming to Reglan, it does not fit, and it's probably not appreciated by all the old pioneers that still live in this town.
Ka pai. Kia ora, aku mihi ki a koe.
Kia ora.
Thanks, Mr. Yell. Ms. Cedric?
No questions, but thank you very much, Mr. Green.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh, thank you very much. Your presentation was really helpful. In fact, I too picked up on that colonial town, and I hadn't heard that before in relation to Raglan. It did paint a good picture. So thank you. Appreciate your submission.
Thank you.
Mr. Cooney?
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
And I've got no questions either. Thanks, Ms. Greensell. You've laid it out pretty clearly, so nothing further from me. So thank you very much for your submission, and like the others, you're welcome to stay listening. Welcome to do something else, just whatever suits you. So thanks again.
Thank you for your time.
Mr. and Mrs. Spencer, I don't know if you've got the technology to turn the sound on, but if you do that, you should have done that, that's good. So just in your own time, you don't need to restate the things that we've talked about with you before, and I think you've probably sensed from the questions that we've asked already that we're pretty live to your issue. We're working towards a way of resolving it, but over to you.
Okay, firstly, thanks.
Sorry, hang on. I'll just try the other laptop.
We're getting some.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I might just turn our volume up a little bit. Yeah, we can hear that. Thank you.
Okay, firstly, I'd like to acknowledge that we are grateful for the support we've received from you and the councillors that have got back to us since our hearing in February. We're really grateful for that. A couple of points I'd like to make is when we put this proposal in July 2018, we had a meeting with the Mayor and the CEO, and we had had the whole plans drawn up by BCD engineers for the lifting of the light. We'd had costings, we had the surveyors surveyed the whole town, so everything was laid out and costings as to what would need to be done to lift the light 4 metres, and it would be just straight up above where it is, which would be in the beacon, the navigational beacon, the diamond that's already there, so it would not affect any other property. It would be in front of that diamond as it stands. Now, all that cost us money, which we were happy to do, and we also gave a stipulation for a year that we were willing to fund this. And my question is, was this ever tabled? We were assured that when we handed all this to the Mayor and the CEO, that it would be looked into. And I just want to know if the people, the councillors that would need to look at this for us, had ever seen it. Was it ever tabled? Was it ever discussed? We gave a year for them to get back to us, and we heard nothing. And I just really want to know whatever happened about that proposal we put forward. If someone...
We don't know the answer to that. We're independent of the council. We're here to hear submissions on the district plan, and that's what we do.
Yes.
If there's information that folk need to put in front of us, then they need to. But I think from the previous hearing and from what you've said now, I think two things we could safely say. One is there seems to have been a communication breakdown somewhere in the chain between yourselves, the district and the region, and closing that loop up. And we've undertaken to do our best to unstick it. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn to say that we've raised the background to this with His Worship the Mayor, but he has to go through a process with the region, because it's the region that owns, as we said before, the region owns the navigation marker itself. There was a misconception, I think it's again fair to say, within some arms of the council that I alluded to before about what came first, the chicken or the egg. And I think that has now been clarified. The issue is not that the district plan needs to be amended first and foremost. The first and foremost issue is that someone needs to make the decision and the undertaking to move or to raise the beacon. And I don't think we can say any more to you today than what we could say in February, other than that we think, and Ms. Salmon has confirmed, that two things. One, there's no objection from the council in principle to creating a mechanism that allows you to build once the light has been moved, and that needs some clever thinking about how to actually word that in the plan so that it protects the existing situation while it remains and protects the situation in the future when that change has been made. So that's really all we can say by way of feedback. We haven't got a silver bullet today that says, snap, we can fix it. But we have undertaken to raise it with the council senior folk, which we have done. Ms. Salmon has expressed a willingness, I think, to work with drafting provisions in the plan that give effect to what we've just been talking about. So whilst that's not the silver bullet that gives you a solution this afternoon, I'd be pretty disappointed that by the time our process is finished, we haven't resolved this from a district plan point of view in a way that allows the region to do its thinking, and once they've done that this wouldn't be a problem for you.
I really appreciate your input so far and understand what you're saying. As you realise, time isn't on our side at our age, so yeah. Thank you very much, and yes, we really look forward to hearing from the council and continuing this. All
right. Is that all you wanted to say to us today?
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for that. Hopefully the Zoom experience wasn't too daunting.
No.
I'll just see if there's any questions from any of the other members of the panel. Mr. Cooney?
No, I think we're going to try and work on some wording to see what we can do there.
Yeah, really.
Thanks, Mr. Cooney. Ms. Tiaho?
No, thank you. All the best to you.
Thank you. Ms. Sedgwick?
No, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Which I think that brings us to the end of the people that are scheduled, or the submitters that are scheduled to present to us today. The one thing that we talked about right at the very start, or near the start, was the where to from here steps. I think unless the panel has any other points to make, I think all we're going to do as of now is to adjourn, to consider what we've heard today in terms of process going forward. We certainly, I think, are unanimous in the view that whatever course of action's taken, there is some further work that needs to be done. But whether that's tinkering with what's already in existence or doing something more substantial is something that we're going to give some further thought to, and we'll be back in touch with folk about that when we've done that. I think it's our intention to do that reasonably quickly. We're not going to take weeks and weeks and weeks. I'd like to think that we'd get back to folk, if not this week, then next, and I think we'd be aiming to do that probably pretty quickly, because cogitating on it's probably not going to make the decision any easier or assist it. We just need to get down to tin tacks and work through it. So unless there's anything else, I do want to say one further thing before we adjourn, but in terms of where to from here and in terms of concluding today, is there anything else anyone needs to raise or wishes to raise with us? Anything from you, Ms. Salmon, from the staff point of view?
No, nothing further from me, thank you.
Thank you. What about from the submitters? Anything that they need to tell us about? I suspect not. They've all done their thing. Doesn't look like it. Well, that's good. We will adjourn. What I would like to very quickly do, though, is to go around the room with the submitters and those that have participated, just to see what their their experience of a virtual hearing has been. People like the Ministry for the Environment and others are really interested in seeing whether this could become a more realistic option going forward. And obviously part of that is people's experiences of dealing with it. And obviously there's presumably advantages and disadvantages of a process like this. You know, no one from Ragland's had to jump in a car and drive to Ngaruahia, for example. So just very quickly, not looking to prolong things for very long, but I suppose the question would be is if we were to do further hearings of this sort of nature, would a Zoom type meeting be something that would find favour with people or not? So happy to take that in any order, just whoever would like to go first, feel free.
Angeline Greensill here. I think it's great in terms of, you know, not having to travel. It's good for the environment. We're not using petrol, and being able to just sit in the comfort of our own homes and talk. I think it's a great way. I'm not sure about Zoom, whether it's secure. I suppose it is. There are Google Hangouts and other spaces, but I think online meetings are good in terms of time and yeah. So I'm in support.
Oh, that's good. You haven't felt disadvantaged in any way in terms of saying what you wanted to say?
Not really. No, thank you.
Oh, no, that's good. Thank you.
Isabel said, well, we're happy with it. Yeah, we just
wasn't too daunting. Oh, that's good. Ms. Parson.
Yes. Well, second time round, I'll be so much more smooth with it, and I'll prepare a bit more. So all good for me, Zoom. Yeah, just whatever really it takes at the moment, right, to get this stuff happening. Just happy, flexible.
What do you think going forward, though, when we're in, you know, this talk about being out of back to level 1, even as early as next week? How would you think this process would go, you know, when we're not limited by COVID?
So are you talking, because I missed a little bit there, sorry. Are you talking about, you know, if we continued this particular conversation around Raglan?
No, as a general proposition, if there were to be more hearings that you were a party to on whatever it happened to be.
Yes.
Do you find that the Zoom type, it doesn't have to be Zoom as Ms. Greensill said, but there's other forums, but this virtual meeting is been a good process from your point of view?
Yeah, I think it's a good process. It's, you know, when it's run well, it works well. I think there's nothing like face to face. So I think a mix is good. Ideally, like I think it all by Zoom is a bit, you miss a bit, you know, depends what you're talking about. If it's about Raglan character, you probably want a bit of face to face. But if you're talking about something else which is a bit more dry, probably Zoom is fine. But yeah, a mix, but it works well.
Okay. Ms. Thompson wouldn't be able to bring her cat with her if she was appearing at a hearing face to face, so I just saw it walk into shot on the side. Ms. Thompson, you're not a submitter as such, but you've been observing what we've done today. What's your observation
kia ora,
sitting in a virtual room as opposed to sitting in the back of a hearing room?
Kia ora, thank you, Phil. I'm sorry I had to go out because I actually had another Zoom meeting in between. I probably agree with Gabrielle in terms of, you know, when it's something as impassioned as looking at communities' characters, having that option of perhaps zooming in or that face-to-face is really constructive. I attended the workshop earlier on this year and with regard to this with staff and others, and I found that really useful, particularly meeting with the different hapu groups within our community. You know, it certainly adds to the bountiful discussions that are held in communities. So having both options is really good.
Cool.
So thank you for the opportunity to speak to that.
Thanks for that. What about you, Mr. Lawson?
Yeah, I found it much better, in fact, with Zoom. And again, it's that issue of not having to come over to Ngaruahia. It's good that Sandra is there for people who have problems using the technology. So thank you, Sandra, for coming over. And I think it might be worth looking at how much you can use the raised hand option, which is electronically available,
Mm.
and they chat, because sometimes, well, once I put in a comment, and I'm not sure whether you saw it or not, but it just seems to me that sometimes the participants might be able to give you information or comments or whatever, and it might be relevant. If it's in the chat, you can ignore it if you don't think so. So that's
yeah. I think one of the challenges with that is that it's not necessarily as transparent as saying your piece. At least this way, if you're talking, it's recordable and everyone can hear and see it. Whereas if we have sort of private chats, sort of semi-online but semi-offline, people will see things and others won't. Because I must say I was paying more attention to what people were saying than looking at the chat screen. But it's a useful point that you've made, and thanks for making it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I think we're done for the day. So after a fairly, I was going to say slow start. It wasn't slow, but it was long. But I think that's been helpful. You've certainly given us all food for thought, and we're grateful for what's been raised with us. We are going to adjourn. We will be back in touch sooner rather than later in terms of our thinking on a way forward, whatever that may be. So thank you again for your participation today, and we wish you well for things going forward. So we'll stand adjourned, and thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Maybe if the panel can just hang fire for a moment once everybody's
Still recording, Sandra.